Planetside 2, a little old MMO FPS game that despite all trials and tribulations, continues to play host to a quaint little community after 12 years of being alive. It's a game that, if you've been around my channel for a while, will know that I have quite an intimate relationship with, and also a pretty good mechanical understanding of. It's actually a game that means a lot to me despite my complaints with it in recent years. I know that for many, it's a game that means, or meant a lot at one point, to them as well. However, whenever you ask someone why the game means a lot to them, more often than not, you're going to get answers pertaining to the game's scale, its unique take on the genre as a whole, or its social aspects. I know a lot of people ended up meeting lifelong friends through Planetside 2, and I'm very much someone who is in that bucket as well. But for me, folks, there's actually another reason that Planetside 2 means a lot to me as well, even to this day. And it comes as someone who really appreciates first-person shooter games that really hold great core design principles. And Planetside 2 was one of those games that held one of the tightest designs for a core component of a first-person shooter game. A component that, more often than not, will decide if said game succeeds or fails. That core component is gunplay. Planetside's gunplay is, in my opinion, one of the tightest and most engaging that we've ever seen in the first-person shooter space, to such a standard that we often see it struggle to be replicated in modern-day first-person shooter games. So, in this video, I wanted to do a bit of a deep dive and a retrospective as to why. Why did, or does, Planetside's gunplay feel so good, and what are the individual components that come together to make up the system? And maybe even more importantly, how did they work together to create an engaging yet approachable skill curve? And I think that out of the gate here, the most important question that we need to answer first is actually the second question. That being, what were the components that made up Planetside's gunplay? Obviously, every gun in every FPS game to have ever existed is going to be characterized by basic statistics like your damage per shot, the amount of rounds it fires per second or minute, the reload time, yada yada yada. But if we were to dig a bit deeper and actually talk about the key principles that made Planetside's gunplay feel so good, I think we can narrow it down to these 4. 1. Weapon recoil, and the way the game adopted key stats that made up a weapon's recoil pattern, all of which were transparently available to the public. 2. Cone of fire, or more importantly, the sense of accuracy or randomness that a weapon inherently carried across multiple stances and movement states. 3. The broader time to kill of the game, how the baseline time to kill of the game was modeled, and how further to that, some weapons carried more damage over range than others. And 4. Headshot multipliers. The reward that came from doming the poor SOB you were facing with a truckload of damage that could change the outcome of a fight entirely if you were skilled enough. These 4 pillars and the way they were implemented throughout the game's armory not only made every weapon in the game feel both unique and relevant at the same time, but also introduced a healthy yet approachable skill curve that could be mastered by players over time. It conquered the very challenge that every FPS game faces when it navigates gunplay, the ability to keep both veteran and new players engaged, and this is how each mechanic played its part to achieve that. Let's start off with the weapon recoil side of the discussion here. Planetside 2 achieved 2 things with its weapon recoil system: nuance and transparency. You see, folks, each and every weapon had a unique stat for the following recoil mechanics. Vertical recoil, the degree in which your weapon would push upwards per shot. Horizontal recoil, the degree in which your weapon would kick left or right per shot. Horizontal tolerance, which controlled the amount of shots a weapon could shift horizontally in one direction before being forced to return to center at least once, basically determining the bounds in which a weapon could drift from the horizontal center. Recoil angle, which would at times tilt the entire weapon's recoil pattern as outlined with the stats we've just discussed either to the left or to the right. And finally, the first shot multiplier, which would hold a flat multiplier to the kick of the first shot fired in every burst you made with the weapon. So every time you lifted your hands off the trigger, you'd have to deal with the first shot multiplier again. Now, all of this did a couple of very important things for the game. Firstly, it gave the developers the ability to create a unique recoil pattern and behavior for literally every weapon in the game, and we are talking a game with an arsenal of 100+ weapons. A couple of weapons weapons, they may have shared the similar recoil pattern, but they would also hold completely different horizontal recoil patterns to make them feel unique. Some weapons sported much higher first shot multipliers to their recoil, forcing a higher level of skill if you wanted to burst them frequently to score kills at range. Conversely, burst fire weapons were given a first shot multiplier deficit, which actually made their first shots of every burst more accurate, giving burst fire weaponry in the game a really strong identity. And secondly, because these stats were transparent and findable on the game's wiki page, it meant that budding players could take a moment to read the recoil stats should they wish to do so, and actually work out what kind of weapon recoil they were going to deal with, even before they purchased the weapon in-game. And because every aspect of the weapon's recoil was laid out, players could also then adjust accordingly and learn how to specifically counter the recoil pattern of their favorite weapons or potential budding weapons that they wanted to add to their arsenal. Very rarely in games do we see this kind of nuance in weapon recoil statistics, and so publicly facing. More often than not, it's just a bunch of contextual sliders that are meant to, give off the idea of a weapon giving off a heavy recoil kick. Planetside's system was bare-ass naked, just waiting for the player base to gaze upon it, and this side of the system alone helped to build a unique arsenal that could also be mastered by the player base through practice and an understanding of what each stat meant. There was no guesswork here, and it gave players the means to master the weaponry recoil in the game. But that wasn't the only weapon handling stat that had a big role in determining how your weapon handled as you fired it. Cone of fire. The big bad wolf that is cone of fire. Quite possibly one of the most controversial faculties of gunplay design in a lot of first-person shooter games. I mean, come on, right? Randomness in where your bullets go as you fire your weapon? Who wants to deal with that? Just shoot where I point my damn barrel, thanks. Randomness is going to take away from my agency as a player, goddammit, is, I'm sure, what a lot of you are hoping I'm going to say here, but I'm not. Folks, the implementation of cone of fire mechanics and most importantly, cone of fire bloom is one of the most important aspects of Planetside 2's gunplay, and I'm going to be completely honest with you guys here, it was implemented to perfection. And before you all go racing down to the comments to rage at me, allow me to explain. Cone of fire and bloom mechanics do a couple of very important things for first-person shooter games, and in Planetside 2, it achieved two key outcomes. For one, it further emphasized the effective range of every weapon in the game, and it added an additional degree of challenge if you wanted to use said weapon beyond the range it was designed for. And two, it added a general skill curve to the game that meant that simply holding mouse 1 with a light machine gun wasn't the automatic I win button as you simply melted through hordes of enemies. You see folks, should a weapon's recoil pattern be mastered or eliminated through player skill or through the use of certain attachments, both of which are very possible in Planetside 2, you end up in situations where weapons can not only begin to extend way past their intended effective engagement ranges, but it also translates to an overly laser beamy gunplay, which also promotes passive gameplay. Delta Force is a great example of this in action. That game allows you to customize your weapons beyond the point of them being recognizable, while also eliminating any sense of recoil from them completely. Because the game doesn't have any cone of fire mechanics, you can laser beam targets with assault rifles at 100 meters plus. Sometimes you can counter sniper rifles where they should be dominant. Now, switching back to Planetside 2, let's just say that you could do that with, say, a gauss saw. Train your crosshair on a target through mastery of its recoil pattern, which I will be honest is pretty easy to do with some practice, and then you just can hold down the trigger, printing kills. This game would become even more unbearable to play in the infantry domain overnight. This is exactly what the cone of fire system sets out to avoid. It provides a soft barrier that demands an extra layer of finesse from the player to achieve results at range, but also in CQC when chaining kills. So, while no, you just can't hold down the trigger and expect the magic to happen, you could, say, start bursting, fanning the trigger in a rhythmic pattern that resets the bloom and keeps the accuracy of your weapon neatly trained on target to score timely kills. Learning the bloom reset time on your favorite weapons to keep the accuracy dialed in as efficiently as possible. This mechanic was truly what separated the boys from the men in Planetside infantry combat. The extra layer of weapon proficiency that allowed higher skill players to keep their rounds trained on targets' heads while seemingly never missing a beat. firing too long, and you'd be dealing with an unpredictable weapon with no sense of accuracy whatsoever. But on the flip side, burst too often, and you'd be missing out on the optimal damage output that would see you lose more fights than you'd win. These thresholds would change per weapon and per range that you were fighting at. Higher damage weapons tend to bloom harder and faster, whereas faster firing but lesser damaging weapons would tend to bloom at a slower rate per shot. It wasn't just a factor in long range either. You needed to burst in CQC if you were going for headshots half the time as well, especially if you were transitioning from target to target quickly. Cone of Fire not only added that extra skill curve to Planetside, but it strengthened the identity of much of the game's arsenal and ensured that they held strengths for their intended ranges. While many detest Cone of Fire mechanics in games, this game was wholeheartedly healthier for it. So you have those two elements that set the stage for the experience that is firing your weapons in the game and how it feels. Now comes easily one of the most defining elements of how an FPS game feels to play when it comes to engaging opponents at any turn: the time to kill. Time to kill in games can be such a hard balance to strike. Make it too fast, and sure, it feels like you can go on absolute rampages, and if you're the king of positioning, you're going to feel unbeatable, but turn the scenario against you and it feels like you have no counterplay in the game. Make it too slow on the other hand, and it feels like you're dealing with absolute bullet sponges of targets with no weight to your gunplay, as though you're shooting Nerf darts. Sure, this affords you all the time in the world to react to threats as they come, but let's be 100% honest here, a battle of the Nerf darts ain't exactly the best either. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for good counterplay opportunities, but there's a limit to when you just need to accept that you're gonna die in a certain scenario. And time to kill is also often a subjective matter depending on the taste of each and every one of you out there. Short time to kills tend to reward initial position and the ability to jump targets, whereas longer time to kills tend to reward movement and the ability to maintain your aim over a longer burst and a prolonged engagement. Some prefer one style of gameplay over the other, and that's okay. So I do acknowledge that in this section it's going to be a bit more of a subjective take, but in my opinion, Planetside 2 achieved the perfect middle ground when considered against its movement speed, its pace of its gameplay, and most importantly, its weaponry design. Planetside's baseline time to kill was balanced to sit anywhere between 400 and 600 milliseconds on average, assuming you achieved a perfect body shot accuracy. And it also depended on the weapon and its characteristics that you were using. Some weapons achieved this with a blitzing rate of fire and 10 to 12 shot kills, while others took the I hit like a truck route and would do the job in 5 to 6 shots while firing a lot slower. Easier to handle weapons from a cone of fire and recoil perspective often held time to kills that sat on the longer end of the spectrum as well, as a direct balancing act to their ease of use, whereas weapons with a steeper learning and skill curve sat on the pointier end of the stick and were able to get the job done much faster. So the time to kill range did give each and every weapon more identity while remaining balanced in the game to a certain extent. An important point worth raising. But in my view, the more important point to be taking away from all this here is that Planetside actually struck a remarkable balance that wasn't so fast to the point where a gunfight felt like it ended before it began, nor was it so slow that individual aim, skill, or positioning felt irrelevant by somebody hitting you with the 180-degree turn. I really call it a Goldilocks zone of time to kill, one that afforded that golden zone of reaction time, but also player authority to start a firefight with confidence as well. It was also a time to kill that you could feel understood the pace of the game and worked in tandem with the movement system as well. It wasn't like you were dealing with a slower time to kill while dealing with Titanfall-esque movement, right? Things were grounded, which again meant that a balance between reaction capability and the advantage to the initiator was kind of struck really well here. And further to that, the way this time to kill ballooned out over extended ranges as well really was quite well done across a lot of weapon archetypes. It gave weapons distinct effective ranges alongside the cone of fire system, but also, as we said before and are going to harp on about here shortly, still let players who are able to tackle the challenge an ability to stretch that effective range out even further to snag a kill if their skills allowed it. And sort of further to the broader time to kill, but also kind of adjacent to it, we've got to talk about the game's headshot multiplier, the tool at the disposal disposal of all players in the community if they had the skills or abilities to put it to use regularly to turn the tides in their favor at any point of a firefight. Planetside 2 adopted a typical headshot multiplier of 2 times damage across pretty much all of its automatic weapons, with some semi-autos or shotguns getting a different multiplier. Which, while yes, sounds like the obvious choice for a headshot multiplier in first-person shooter games, is actually starting to represent a smaller and smaller percentile of the headshot multipliers we see in gunplay systems. A lot of games tend to opt for a 1.25 to 1.5 times headshot multiplier these days, depending on their gameplay. Now, whether this be done as a means to dampen the skill gap between players or as a means to elongate time to kill times, it's up for debate and depends on the game you look at. But in Planetside, the game well and truly leaned into rewarding the skill that it took to consistently score headshots. It gave players the means to effectively cut the time to kill of their chosen weapon in half, improving the overall magazine economy and time on target per target. In the context of Planetside, this was a crucial decision from the developers for a couple of reasons. For one, it presented a clear, albeit challenging way at times to get better at the game and become a stronger player while also feeling natural. It's an almost natural and expected, skill curve to see in first-person shooter games. You get headshots, you're going to be more efficient, and it felt like the developers wanted to celebrate that. But two, it also created a skill gap that allowed the players of higher skill a means to assert some authority over the battlefield on an individual level. It gave players who held the skills a means to combat the persistent numbers advantage they would constantly face in this game if they applied headshots effectively. It's so clear to me that Planetside 2's original gunplay designers understood that due to the nature of this game's design, there would need to be some way for players to find an edge and to keep the momentum moving, a tool on the proverbial tool belt that would find them that advantage, even if it came at the cost of it being challenging to do. Headshots were the tool on that tool belt. And let's be clear here, 9 times out of 10, should a player come across a straight 2v1 scenario against a pair of competent players, they're still likely to lose that fight, even if they're an absolute gun at the game that can nail constant headshots. But the headshot multiplier in this game gave players who were willing to improve at their game a chance to put their skills to use and maybe, just maybe, find a way to turn the tide in those situations. This was crucial to Planetside. Players who were mastering the cone of fire and recoil mechanics of the game, it gave them a means to take things just one step further, leading to a material impact on the time to kill of their engagements, which gave them more sway in the game, and it was the final step in mastering the gunplay more broadly to achieve an extremely rewarding and addicting result, even to this day. New players, yes, could still be highly effective with body shots, but better players who held a very clear grasp on weapons and recoil control could leverage their skills to reap the fruits of their labor with headshots. A true skill curve that was tough to climb, yet so bloody rewarding as you did. And that kept a lot of us around for the long run. Look, individually, these mechanics were all handled in a way that gave each weapon and the overall gunplay a sense of character. But you take all of this and you throw it all into the one-pan dish that was Planetside 2, and well, you end up with a recipe for an approachable, satisfying, challenging, yet rewarding and impactful gunplay system that, despite all of Planetside 2's quirks and faults, I dare argue is one of gaming's finest from a first-person shooter perspective. If I'm being honest with you folks, I really find that Planetside gunplay represents a bit of a design of an era gone by. We seem to be in an era these days where many shooters tend to simplify their gunplay systems in the name of total accessibility and mass appeal. And while, sure, it works to get people through the door and it works to get people into the game, I personally find that a lot of gunplay from these games these days tends to feel pretty shallow comparatively, as though you can either cheese the skill curve out of the game entirely with the right attachment combos, or that there just isn't a whole lot of skill curve present in the first place. Like, there hasn't been much thought placed in the journey of going from being a new player to an experienced player, and I think that's what Planetside really captured with its gunplay. The sense of journey in its skill expression and skill development. A journey from being a new player, coming to grips with all of the nuance that is this gunplay, to an experienced shooter, being able to leverage the mechanics to your will and produce results as a result of that. And it's worth highlighting here as well that Planetside gunplay had the capacity to feel rewarding and good at all stages of that journey. You know, the layers that built up the experience of shooting a weapon in this game felt raw, weighty, impactful, like there were consequences to your ability or your inability to leverage them appropriately, and that was fun to manipulate at all levels when it worked in your favor. But then came the skill curve if you stuck with the game. As you learn the recoil patterns, you're also developing burst timing intuition. As you master positioning, you're learning the effective ranges of your arsenal. As you grow as a player, you're putting it all together to score the perfect kill streak. And when you finally make it happen, when you finally start to shape the chaos of Planetside to your will through mastery of this incredibly complex and deep gunplay system, it was a feeling like no other. In an era where so many shooters are simplifying their gunplay system, Planetside 2's approach stands as a testament to the rewards of embracing complexity and skill expression. It created a gunplay system where weapons felt distinct, combat felt dynamic, and improvement felt meaningful. It was a system where the whole became far greater than the sum of its already impressive components. While Planetside was ultimately, yes, a game about massive scale conflicts and a war across a planet, it was truly underpinned by one of the greatest gunplay systems of our time. And to me, that's in all honesty a bit of a tragedy, you know? A game which could never get its macro flow sorted out properly was always carrying an incredibly deep and satisfied gunplay system under the belly. And I really think that would have resonated with a lot more budding FPS players out there had the rest of the game sorted out its pain points, you know? That's obviously not where we are now, and that's okay. But I really do wish for a time where FPS games kind of take note out of Planetside's book, of the skill curve that Planetside's gunplay captured, and maybe, just maybe, replicate that in their own titles. Anyway, folks, that wraps up a far longer video than I expected to be making when I started writing out this one, and truth be told, I had a lot of fun talking about this one. Planetside's gunplay is something that is quite special to me and, you know, something I've had a lot of experience dealing with, so it was fun to go back and sort of have a bit of a critical think as to why this game's gunplay does resonate with me so fiercely, if you will. But with that being said, guys, if you enjoyed today's video, then be sure to backhand the like button. It goes a long way to supporting the channel, and if you're somebody who's new to the channel, consider subscribing. We do a lot of first-person shooter content across the board here, and given how stacked the end of this year is potentially looking with updates and new games, we're going to be a very busy channel. Also, let me know down in the comment section down below what your thoughts are on Planetside 2's gunplay, or if you're someone who never played Planetside 2, then what do you think? Conceptually, do you think this game sounds like it's got a good gunplay system, or is it just too complex for you to handle? Let me know. But until next time, folks, peace out, and I will see you all in the next video. Have a good one, guys.